Hi, welcome to part 2 of how to build your first computer. Part 1, gather your components and make sure you get the right ones. So first you have your motherboard, your power supply, your CPU, which is the most important part, your graphics card, this is either or, your RAM, this is DDR3 RAMs, your hard drive, and here we've chosen solid state drive. And we've opted for an optional fan, your computer case, and that's it to start building your first computer. Step 2, assembly. Warning, you are working with electrical components, so you shouldn't be working on static prone areas such as your rug, as I'm doing right now, but I do have an anti-static sheet around my motherboard, so it's fine. First step, what you want to do is loosen the CPU clip. This is an Intel specific CPU clip, so on an AMD motherboard it'll be different. Intel CPU, they have specific notches on the side, and you want to make sure that they fit inside the socket. Just take a good look, you'll see that they have blanked out the areas for you. When you put it in, the CPU should be snug and not moving. Once you have that down, you could clamp it down. Make sure that the edge goes down the screw first before you clamp it down. Next thing you do is you install the clamp for your fan. Intel CPU for Sandy Bridge, they use socket 1155 clamps. These allow the CPU fan to have a tight contact with the CPU and allows better cooling. The socket does have screws that go through the motherboard, so what you have to do is flip it over and install the screws so that the socket, the clamp stays tight on the motherboard. Different manufacturers have different ways of putting on the socket for the clamp for your CPU fan, but generally they all follow this sort of a back plate. And since this is a pre-assembly, I did not put any thermal paste on the CPU, but normally you would if you're placing your final constructions. So here I actually placed the fan clamp in the wrong orientation so that the final fan placement is blocking the first memory slot. This is why you do a pre-assembly, to make sure that you have everything right before you place it in the computer case. So I'll fix that really quick. So I've already corrected the clamp orientation and have everything screwed in. You just want a little pea-sized shape of thermal paste. You don't want too much so that it overflows and it falls onto the motherboard. Otherwise that could create electricity shock and then damage your motherboard. You also don't want to use too little, otherwise the heat conduction would not be sufficient. So you have the fan connected onto the clamp. You want to connect the fan to the motherboard power. That way the fan will start spinning when you turn on the computer. Depending on the maker of your motherboard, the CPU fan slot would usually be different. But if you find a location on the motherboard manual, it'll say CPU_fan. Sometimes you will have a 3-pin fan connector to a 4-pin slot on the motherboard. It's okay, they have a dummy-proof device on there. It's the white guide plate. Just follow it and then it'll seat your fan connector in. Now on to the RAM installation. RAM installation is pretty straightforward. These RAMs, they are DDR3 RAMs. When you were buying your motherboard, you should have looked at the specifications on the motherboard to make sure that you're getting the correct type of RAM. They are 204 pins, and there's an off-center notch in the middle of the RAM. You want to make sure you're placing the notch towards the lower side, or however the orientation of the slots are, and then place them pinned down first. One thing you'll notice is that there's two colors. Since these are dual channel DDR RAMs, you want to seat them in alternate seats. If you only have 2 sticks, or if you have 4 sticks, seat them in all. If you have just 1 stick, stick them in the first slot. The reason is these two color-coded slots are for the RAMs to function at their best. If you don't put them in correct combination, they won't run as well as they should. Please don't mix different RAMs from different manufacturers and different speed, because they will present glitch problems and it's not good. Now the next step is testing your setup. This is basically to test to make sure that all your components are working fine. For this part, although the exact step doesn't really matter, but I'm just gonna go ahead and connect the hard drive first. Hard drives are connected by SATA cables. They are the newer standards. They're short and very fast compared to the old IDE ribbons. SATA cables has an L-shaped foolproof connector so that you can't really force them in. Next step, we're going to connect the power supply to the motherboard. Power supply has one of the bigger ribbons. That's a 24-pin connector cable. All you do is plug it in. Be mindful of the orientations. The cables, each individual pins actually has their own shape, so there's no way you could get it wrong. There is a little clamp on the side that you have to make sure it clicks. After you connect the main power supply ribbon, you have to connect the CPU power. This is the connector cable as shown here. This is the 8-pin. Some motherboard actually takes a 4-pin connector, but usually normal power supplies these days would come with either both an 8 and a 4, so you should be fine there. But just find the correct ones, and then because it's an 8-pin, we're going to use the 8-pin to remove that sticker so that the CPU gets its proper power. Now that that's done, we can go ahead and connect the power to the hard drive that we connected earlier. This is a modular power supply, which means you can connect whatever power cables that you need instead of having everything being supplied and unable to be removed. This helps to reduce clutter in your computer, and it allows better airflow. So what we're going to do is take the SATA power connector. SATA power connectors are actually a little fatter. It looks similar to the SATA data cable which we connected earlier, but it is longer in length. So we're just going to go ahead and then connect the modular cable onto the power supply, and then connect the SATA cable onto the hard drive. It does have an L shape in it, kind of as a foolproof connector, so you don't plug it in the wrong way. Just make sure the L lines up and then plug it in. And now that we have everything connected, if you have a graphic card, it is now time to plug it in so that we could test the graphic card also. The graphics card these days are connected by PCI Express ports. They are much faster compared to before. There were several revisions of PCI Express, but they are mostly backwards compatible, so you don't have to worry about that. This is a PCI Express 2.0 port, which is a much faster revision obviously compared to PCI Express 1. So just make sure it's in the right orientation and then plug it in. PCI Express ports does have a clip at the end of the port, so you want to make sure that clip actually locks in onto the graphic card. So when you pull on the graphic card, it shouldn't come loose right away. It should stay snug. And also, graphic cards are very power hungry, such as this one. You see two power input slots. These are for connections from the power supply straight to the graphic card. Your modular power supply, if you got one, should have came with these. These are specifically used for graphic cards. They contain the 6-pin port as seen before. And if you have graphic card that actually requires more power, that requires the 8-pin type connectors. Some of the cables allows you to turn that 6-pin cable into an 8-pin immediately. On the other end of the power cable is actually this 8-pin, although only 7 pins are cables. That is to connect to the modular power supply. You shouldn't get them mixed up, otherwise sometimes the power won't go through. Just make sure that they go in all the way and then form a secure connection. Now we have all the components ready. We can just connect the main power supply to the power and connect the DVI cable. That's what's the ports on the graphic card. Connect that onto the graphic card and connect a keyboard and a mouse, and that's all you need to start running the computer to test if everything works. To turn on the computer without plugging in the jumper cables from the case, all you have to do is take a screwdriver or something that conducts electricity and then short the power switch on the motherboard. You could see it right here. You'll have to open your motherboard's manual to see what exactly each jumper settings are. They will tell you which two pins are the power switch, which two pins are the reset switch, which two indicates the power LED, and which two pins indicate the HDD LED or the hard disk LED. For us, I already know where it is, so I just tapped it and the computer booted up in less than 10 seconds.